Huh.
Man, it has not been a good day. Apparently in my last episode I went out and caught myself a cold. Go me. But you know, when you're sick and it's cold outside, snowing even, then sometimes it's a nice day to just curl up with a blanket, grab an old book, and make like the old philosophers. Just curl up and think. Philosophers have communicated their ideas in several ways over the years. Books, movies, all kinds of stuff. But when it comes to video games, it's honestly kind of barren, isn't it? It's frustrating because if you think there's any medium that invites serious thought, it's video games. Their exploration, their interactivity, it makes them perfect. But you know, when you do have philosophical ideas in games, it's often in a binary dual choice. Paragon or Renegade, Harvest or Rescue, Save Doug or Save Carly. The game I'm about to talk about, though, invites serious player thought and offers a mind-boggling amount of choice, and it reacts to the player in several unexpected ways. Not a whole lot of games can pull it off, but then again, not a whole lot of games are like Deus Ex.
Where do I even begin? I love the 7 previous games, but these last 3 hold a very special place in my heart. These are the games I make a point to replay every now and then, like a ritual. I mean, you've heard the old adage that when you mention Deus Ex, someone, somewhere, will reinstall it. Hell, I'm sure a few of you right now are reaching for Steam or GOG to do it. For those of you who have played it, the words Deus Ex bring more to mind than just the Latin phrase for God from the machine. It's a game with infinite possibility, where a player is free to play the game however they choose. It's a smart story about gods, conspiracies, technology, and power, and it harbors perhaps one of gaming's most treasured voice lines.
Oh my god, JC, a bomb! A bomb.
Actually, that's an interesting point to bring up now that I think about it. Deus Ex isn't a perfect game. I've spoken a lot about purity and perfection during this series, but this game in particular has very serious flaws. A couple of the stats are straight up worthless, and the voice acting ranges from pretty good to...
Mr. J.C. Denton, in the flesh.
Yeah. It's not just campy like Snake Eater was. It's straight up bad.
But even though this game does have serious flaws, I still love it to bits. A lot of people do. That's something that I don't think a lot of people understand about criticism, that even if a game does have serious flaws and problems, if it has that shining heart underneath, then all those flaws are just kind of meaningless.
You could pick just about any playstyle, focus entirely on it, and beat the game. Every time I play this game, I try to think of some new challenge. This time, I cranked the difficulty up to realistic, put all my points into demolitions, and had at it. It was great! Yes, there are some stats that are kind of useless, like swimming or environmental resistance, but pick any other stat to level up in, and you're pretty much golden. Rifles, heavy weapons, lockpicking, hacking, it's all viable. I sunk all of my points into grenades until I couldn't sink any more, and I still had a great time figuring out when and where to put what kinds of grenades to solve what kinds of problems. But therein lies the rub. Unlike Snake Eater, you don't have an unlimited utility belt full of toys to play around with. In Deus Ex, there is no possible way to level up in absolutely everything. And that's an important detail that even later games in the series wouldn't grasp. You could try to label Deus Ex with any kind of genre, and at least somebody would agree with you, but I personally go with RPG, because you have to pick a role and stick with it. You need to actually roleplay. You can't come across a locked container and suddenly decide you're good at lockpicking. You can't choose to augment yourself with both organic invisibility and radar invisibility. You have to make a choice. This would be for naught if the designer can't design around every kind of playstyle allowed. See System Shock 2, where if you hadn't chosen the right skills and invested in them early enough, you'd be out of luck. But here, the level design is careful enough to allow anyone to succeed. Well, if you didn't put all your skill points into swimming or environmental resistance anyway. Let's examine Liberty Island as a basic example of this. This is one of my favorite examples of level design ever. It's a perfect example of Deus Ex's design philosophy. First off, let's get one design quirk out of the way. Your superiors give you a map of the island to help you get around. Important note, this is not a mini-map. This is a JPEG of an overhead shot of the level. There are a couple labels marking important areas so you're not totally lost, but there's no little triangle showing where you are. You have to navigate this level on your own, without any HUD markers or anything like that.
Most of the levels in this game don't even give you that courtesy. A big part of this game is scouting out the area and figuring out what the hell you're gonna do. The player's always given a clear objective so they can stay focused, but aside from that, they have to figure it out for themselves.
Anyway, back to Liberty Island itself. I can think of like 9 different ways in and out of this level. You could run up the front entrance and go for a full frontal assault. You could sneak behind on these trailers here. You could choose to rescue Gunter from his little prison, or you could let him sit there until you talk to the terrorist leader, which is kind of what Gunter deserves, the prick. If you want to go through the front door, you could rely on your mad lockpicking or bombing skills, or you could heed your superior's advice and go talk to Harley here on the other side of the map, who gives you a key and some advice. Or you could choose to ignore him outright if you choose to take these ladders up to the roof. But if you go up to the roof, you'll be skipping out on valuable items on the ground floor, and you won't get that sweet cash bonus at the end of the mission for rescuing Gunter. Plus, you'll have to deal with these gas grenade traps, which will be easy or hard depending on your demolition stat. Easy for me in this run-through if you've been paying attention. If you do choose to save Gunter though, you'll have to either disable this alarm or find an alternate path through the vents. Or you could just shoot everybody, which isn't very nice, but hey, it gets the job done. All of these different variables, of course, lead to the same result, confronting the terrorist leader atop the statue. He surrenders, the other UNATCO agents take him away, and you're free to go back to the UNATCO headquarters on the island. Cue one of the game's most iconic tunes.
Come on in. The retinal scanner can read blood vessel patterns right through your sunglasses.
Every single level in this game follows in Liberty Island's footsteps, and in fact, they grow more and more complex as the game goes on and you get better at doing certain things. But remember, this is a role-playing game at heart. Liberty Island is all about getting your feet wet with certain skills and deciding what you like doing, what you don't like doing, and what you want to try in the future. When the future comes, though, you need to remain committed to your gameplay choices. The challenge, then, comes from trying to find a way to make your own playstyle fit into the current problem that the game is presenting you. If there's a door you can't unlock because you didn't invest in lockpicking, for example, you need to find a key. If the door is structurally weak, you could toss a grenade or rocket at it and blow it up, but that'll inevitably draw enemies near if you're trying to be sneaky. If you see a room full of enemies, you could just shoot them all down with a high rifle stat, blow them all up with a well-aimed rocket blast, toss a gas grenade to stun them, hack a turret to shoot them down, or if your build doesn't allow for any of that, you can simply sneak past them using a cloaking augmentation or thermoptic camo. In many cases, rooms full of guards are totally optional, and they can be bypassed entirely if you have the right skill.
This isn't a game you can necessarily 100% complete. Playing a jack-of-all-trades character is highly discouraged, but I think that's a really good thing. It encourages player expression rather than straight-up problem-solving. It puts the role-playing back in role-playing game.
But how do you make the story react to so many different player interactions? No developer is capable of creating a unique story for every single player. I mean, games like Fallout New Vegas and the Mass Effect trilogy come pretty close, and my next game really screws with the concept. But the idea of a completely malleable story that changes for every single possible player is pretty insane. Which is why I think it's interesting that Deus Ex doesn't have a story like that. Oh, characters will react differently depending on how you handle missions, like how your brother Paul compliments you on handling Liberty Island non-lethally, or a more infamous example that I personally didn't see coming the first time.
By the way, Denton, stay out of the ladies' restroom. That kind of activity embarrasses the agency more than it does you.
But it's not like the main plot of the game is going to change each time you play it. No matter what skills you invest in or how you handle each mission, You're always going to start on Liberty Island, discover UNATCO's dark secret, help Tracer Tong cure the plague, meet the Illuminati, and foil Bob Page's domination scheme. However, the game is very smart about its subject matter. First off, the core of the game's story is about deciding who holds power and where. The ending choice is deciding whether you want to rule the world alone as a dictator, rule it with the Illuminati in secret like the good old days, or just let it fall into total anarchy. It's a clever meta-commentary on the player's own choices throughout the game. After all, as Helios says in their ending,
"You will be who you will be. We are our choices."
The ending is the only real influential story decision you get to make in this game. Yes, you might save some important NPCs along the way who will help you later, but really the only big decision you get to make in the game's story is who gets to rule the world at the end, if anybody. For the majority of the game, the player character is just a pawn being manipulated by various different conspiracies. You get to meet many different characters, some of which will feed you conflicting information or ideologies. Some former enemies might turn out to be friends. Some former friends might turn out to be enemies. Every character is trying to push you towards a certain agenda. Aside from Bob Page and his Splinter group, there's no real bad guy in this giant chess game.
It's important to bring up that in this game, the Illuminati is not necessarily evil. They're presented as more of a benevolent conspiracy. The conflict only arises when some jerk decides to hoard all the power for himself.
It's not just characters manipulating you either. Many levels include books and iPads lying around that fill you in on the game's lore, but a select few are real-life texts from philosophers and science fiction writers. There's a digital copy of Thomas Paine's Common Sense lying in a bedroom in the middle of a Paris under martial law, and you'll run into segments of G.K. Chesterton's The Man Who Was Thursday as you make your way through the story. This room, in the cathedral level, practically gives you a thorough history lesson into the Knights Templar. And it's a real history lesson. All this stuff really happened. When you play this game, you have a lot of different voices telling you how to think. Some real, some fictional. Some subtle, some not so much. And some of them contradict each other. It's up to the player to reach their own conclusion by the end of the game, where they need to make a choice on how to deal with Area 51. Rather than simply present an interesting philosophical concept in the form of a text or a film, it lets the player choose how they want to perceive the world. And the ending doesn't take place at some ending Generatotron machine where you press one of 3 buttons and it just plays an FMV lecturing you about what you did. No, each choice is a different mission in and of itself, and when you choose to do something, you hear the other characters plead with you to reconsider. Rather than making you the puppet master, Deus Ex puts you at not just one, but several puppet masters' mercies up until the very end. But it makes you a self-conscious puppet, able to sense your surroundings and make your own judgments before the game cuts the strings off at the very end, so you can draw your own conclusion. In that regard, the game's themes of conspiracy fit the philosophical meta-narrative very nicely. Just about every conspiracy you've heard crazy people talk about is made real in this game. The Illuminati, Area 51, aliens from Roswell, chupacabras, black helicopters, secret underground laboratories, gene therapy, Men in Black, and the scariest conspiracy there is, malfunctioning vending machines.
No, I wanted orange. It gave me lemon lime.
The Illuminati is made somewhat sympathetic in this game, though, and every other conspiracy mentioned there, aside from maybe the soda, maybe, is caused in part because some jerk decided that just because he could science something together, he should. And that's another philosophical idea at play when you make your final decision.
So yeah, you might chuckle when you hear Roswell, New Mexico, or Majestic 12 name dropped, but the closer you examine those references, the more they make sense in the context of the theme and the narrative.
Everything in this game is here to serve the greater theme of choice. The characters feed you conflicting ideas and try to influence you in their own ways. The pieces of lore and literature strewn about the game world contribute even more ideas to help sway your decision. The conspiracy theories help reinforce the idea that the player is being manipulated and controlled, which makes it all the more satisfying to come to your own conclusion at the end. And, of course, there's like a million different ways to beat this game. Seriously, I can think of 6 different ways just to open a door, let alone solve any of the game's myriad problems. You could beat this game without killing anyone. Well, okay, maybe about 5 people, but that's about it. You don't have to murder your way through this game to get its message the same way you go through BioShock or Spec Ops. The level design in this game is unparalleled. I've played this game 5 times now, and I still discover new stuff every time I play. So why don't more games adapt this philosophy? If Deus Ex is such a landmark title like everyone says it is, why aren't there more games nowadays like it? Why does every other game seem like either a linear hallway or an open-mapped checklist? I'd actually like to posit that that isn't quite true. Yes, it seems like the highest-selling games every year are Call of Duty or GTA clones, but games like Deus Ex are kind of making a comeback. Of course, Deus Ex has gotten a couple sequels and prequels of its own, and I'll talk about those briefly. First, let's get the obvious out of the way first. Invisible War is good, but not nearly as great as its predecessor. Human Revolution did come pretty close when it came to level design, but it's clear that storytelling is not the new Deus Ex team's strongest suit. That came to a head when they released Mankind Divided earlier this year, where the gameplay is as strong as ever, but their attempt at telling a topical political story about prejudice and racism really fell flat. It feels disrespectful, but not out of malice. It just seems like they didn't think the themes or their ramifications through enough. That's a whole other topic for a whole other video, though. But there are other games carrying the torch. Metal Gear Solid 5 took a few pointers from Deus Ex's level design, and it paid off, though again, the story kinda suffered. The Last of Us forces you to go through encounters differently, though it depends less on skill levels and more on your current inventory. And of course, there's Dishonored, which I think acts as the truest successor of the Deus Ex ideals. But really, if you want to see Deus Ex's invisible hand over the industry, just look at any game with open-ended level design. Games where problems can be solved in a myriad of different ways. Encounters that are not only simply complications for the player to get through, but opportunities for the player to express themselves.
You hear a lot of experts call it a possibility space, where it's less about straight-up challenges and more about player expression. That applies both to the level design and to the story. The player is given a problem, both narratively and physically, and they're asked to come to their own conclusion. And again, it's not the most perfect game out there. Aesthetically, it's quite weak, and if you compare it to games like BioShock or Metal Gear Solid 2, the story does kind of lack that wow factor. But, at the same time, the possibility space of this game, along with player expression, is unparalleled. It's a brilliant role-playing game. There is one role-playing game that does surpass it, and we're going to talk about it tomorrow. But first, I need to rest, man. I'm sick. See you then.